shimmering canals of 1938 Venice, a deadly mystery unfolds at the opulent Palazzo dei Sospiri. When English heiress Beatrice Langley collapses at a masquerade ball, poisoned by a sip of Prosecco, Hercule Poirot is summoned to unravel a web of family secrets, jealousy, and betrayal. Anonymous letters, a ruby ring, and a cryptic note, La mort aspetta, point to a plot not to kill, but to terrify. As Poirot navigates the Falliere family's hidden motives, Giovanni's debts, Lorenzo's resentment, and the Contessa's desperate pride, he uncovers a truth that could save or shatter them all. Will the death that waits strike again, or will Poirot's gray cells bring light to Venice's shadows? Chapter 1. The Venetian Invitation. The sun hung low over Venice, casting a golden sheen across the lagoon's restless waters as Hercule Poirot's gondola sliced through the glassy surface. It was the spring of 1938, and the little Belgian detective, with his impeccable mustache and polished patent leather shoes, sat erect, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his Homburg hat. The gondolier's oar dipped rhythmically, propelling them toward the Palazzo dei Sospiri, a grand edifice of weathered marble that seemed to sigh with the weight of centuries. Poirot had come to Venice not for pleasure, though the city's beauty stirred even his fastidious soul, but in response to a letter, an urgent missive from Contessa Maria Falliere, a woman he had met years ago in Paris, whose elegance was matched only by her discretion. The letter, written in a fine, trembling hand, had been cryptic yet compelling. Monsieur Poirot, it read, a shadow has fallen upon my family, a matter of such delicacy that I dare not entrust it to paper. I beg you to come to Venice at once. Your clarity of mind is our only hope. Poirot, whose gray cells thrived on such enigmas, had booked passage immediately, intrigued by the Contessa's reticence and the faint perfume of intrigue that clung to her words. As the gondola moored at the palazzo's private landing, Poirot stepped onto the moss-slicked steps, his cane tapping lightly. The air was heavy with the briny tang of the canal, mingled with the faint sweetness of blooming wisteria. A liveried footman, his face as impassive as the stone lions flanking the entrance, ushered him into the grand salon. The room was a symphony of opulence. Gilded mirrors reflected the flicker of crystal chandeliers, and frescoes of mythological revels adorned the walls. Yet there was a chill in the air, a sense of unease that no amount of Venetian splendor could dispel. Contessa Maria Falliere rose to greet him, her movements graceful despite the strain etched into her patrician features. She was a woman of perhaps 60, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her black silk gown whispering of mourning. Her dark eyes, sharp yet shadowed, met Poirot's with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low and musical, you honor us with your presence. I feared you might not come. Madame, Poirot replied, bowing slightly. When a lady such as yourself calls, Hercule Poirot does not hesitate, but tell me, what is this shadow that troubles you? The Contessa gestured to a velvet-upholstered chair, and Poirot sat, his posture as precise as a metronome. She paced briefly before the tall windows overlooking the canal, where gondolas bobbed like dark swans. It concerns my nephew, Giovanni Falliere, she began. He is the last of our line, a young man of charm but imprudence. 6 months ago, he married an English heiress, Beatrice Langley. A lovely girl, wealthy, but, how shall I say, not of our world. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign his mind was already at work. And this marriage, it does not please the family? The Contessa sighed, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. It is not only that. Giovanni's cousin, Lorenzo, an artist of some talent but a temperament most volatile, despises Beatrice. He calls her an outsider, a threat to our heritage. And there are others, friends, creditors, who resent her influence. I fear, Monsieur Poirot, that someone in this household wishes her harm. Poirot leaned forward, his green eyes gleaming. Harm, madame? You suspect a crime? I cannot say, she admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. But there have been incidents. A broken window in Beatrice's chamber, a gondola untied from its mooring as if to strand her, and whispers, always, whispers of discontent. I beg you to observe, to uncover the truth before it is too late. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. The Contessa's fear was genuine, but there was something she withheld, a hesitation in her gaze that suggested deeper secrets. Rest assured, madame, he said, rising with a flourish. Hercule Poirot shall bring order to this chaos. The truth it may hide, but it cannot escape the little grey cells. As he spoke, the salon doors swung open, and a young man entered, his dark hair tousled, his evening coat slightly askew. Giovanni Falliere, Poirot deduced, noting the aristocratic nose and the careless charm that marked him as a man accustomed to adoration. Zia Maria, Giovanni said, kissing the Contessa's hand. You did not tell me we had a guest. This is Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the Contessa said, her tone cautious. He is visiting. Giovanni's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, offering Poirot a firm handshake. A pleasure, monsieur. I hope Venice treats you well. It is a city of many faces, Poirot replied, his eyes studying Giovanni's. And I intend to see them all. As Giovanni excused himself, citing preparations for a masquerade ball that evening, Poirot's mind buzzed. The Contessa's fear, Giovanni's nonchalance, the spectre of Beatrice Langley, all were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot sensed that the Palazzo dei Sospiri held a mystery as intricate as the canals of Venice itself. He resolved to begin his investigation at the ball, where masks would conceal faces, but perhaps reveal motives. Chapter 2. The Masked Ball. The Palazzo dei Sospiri glowed like a jewel against the Venetian night, its windows ablaze with the light of 100 candles. The masquerade ball, an annual tradition of the Fallier family, drew Venice's elite in a whirl of silk and mystery. Hercule Poirot, clad in a simple black domino and a half-mask that left his piercing green eyes unobscured, stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. The air was thick with the scent of tuberose and wax, and the strains of a Vivaldi concerto floated above the chatter of masked guests. To Poirot, the scene was a tableau vivant, a canvas of human nature, where every gesture, every glance, might betray a hidden truth. He had arrived early, positioning himself near a marble column to observe the arrivals. The Contessa Maria Fallier, resplendent in a silver mask adorned with peacock feathers, moved among her guests with practiced grace, though Poirot noted the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted toward the arched entrance. Giovanni Fallier, the young heir, entered with a flourish, his gold-trimmed mask glinting as he led his bride, Beatrice Langley, onto the floor. Beatrice's emerald gown shimmered, its bodice studded with seed pearls, and her mask, a delicate filigree of green and gold, framed eyes that sparkled with nervous excitement. The couple drew murmurs of admiration and, Poirot suspected, envy. His gaze shifted to Lorenzo Falier, Giovanni's cousin, who lingered near a fresco of Neptune taming the seas. Dressed as a melancholic Pierrot, his white costume stark against the room's opulence, Lorenzo clutched a leather-bound sketchbook, his pencil moving in quick, furtive strokes. Poirot's mustache twitched. The artist's solitude was deliberate, his eyes following Beatrice with an intensity that spoke of more than mere dislike. Was it resentment, as the Contessa had suggested, or something deeper? Jealousy, perhaps, or unacknowledged desire? The ballroom pulsed with life, masks lending an air of intrigue to every interaction. A senator in a crimson cape whispered to a lady in sapphire silk. A young man in a harlequin costume laughed too loudly, his glass of Prosecco sloshing. Poirot's gray cells hummed, cataloging each detail. He noted the butler, Antonio, moving silently among the guests, his tray of drinks steady despite the crowd's jostling. The maid, Sophia, hovered near the refreshment table, her eyes darting nervously as she refilled glasses. The household staff, Poirot knew, were often the unseen eyes of a grand house, privy to secrets their masters overlooked. As the clock neared midnight, the music swelled, and Giovanni spun Beatrice in a waltz, her laughter ringing like a bell. Poirot, ever alert, saw Lorenzo slip his sketchbook into his pocket and move toward the terrace doors, his Pierrot mask casting eerie shadows. Curious, Poirot followed at a discreet distance, his small frame blending into the crowd. The terrace overlooked the canal, its balustrade draped with ivy, and the night air was cool, carrying the faint lap of water against stone. Lorenzo paused, his back to the ballroom, staring into the darkness. Poirot, hidden by a potted orange tree, watched as the artist's fingers clenched, betraying some inner turmoil. A sudden scream shattered the music, sharp and piercing, like glass breaking. The dancers faltered, masks turning toward the terrace. Poirot hastened forward, his cane clicking on the marble floor as guests parted to reveal Beatrice, crumpled against the balustrade, her emerald gown pooling like a spill of ink. A shattered Prosecco flute lay at her feet, its contents seeping into the stone. Giovanni knelt beside her, his mask discarded, his face pale with panic. "Beatrice," he cried, shaking her gently. "What's happened?" Beatrice's eyes fluttered open, her breath ragged. "Poison," she gasped, clutching her throat, her voice barely audible. "The drink. It burned." She slumped again, her head lolling against Giovanni's shoulder. Poirot knelt swiftly, his senses alert. He lifted the broken flute, careful not to touch the liquid, and inhaled. A faint, bitter almond scent confirmed his fear. Cyanide. Yet Beatrice lived, her pulse weak but steady. The dose, he deduced, had been insufficient to kill. A curious choice for a would-be murderer. He scanned the crowd, noting Antonio's frozen stance, Sophia's trembling hands, and Lorenzo, who had returned to the terrace's edge, his Pierrot mask askew, his expression unreadable. "Quickly," Poirot commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Fetch a doctor, and no one is to leave this palazzo." The Contessa, her silver mask glinting, nodded and dispatched a footman. Giovanni cradled Beatrice, his eyes wild with fear, while guests whispered behind their masks, speculation rippling like the canal's tides. Poirot's mind raced. The Prosecco had been served from a communal tray, yet only Beatrice's glass was tainted. The poisoner must have acted with precision, perhaps during a moment of distraction. He recalled Antonio's steady hands, Sophia's nervous glances, and Lorenzo's solitary vigil on the terrace. Had one of them seized an opportunity, or was the culprit among the masked guests, hidden in plain sight? As the doctor arrived, a stern Venetian with a black bag, Poirot stepped back, allowing him to tend Beatrice. She was carried to a chaise in the salon, her condition stable but fragile. The Contessa, her composure fraying, approached Poirot. "Monsieur, is this what I feared? An attack on my family?" "Perhaps, madame," Poirot replied, his eyes narrowing. "But the method, it is curious. Cyanide is swift, yet this dose was weak. It is as if the poisoner wished not to kill, but to warn, or to terrify." He turned his attention to the terrace where the broken flute still lay. The glass was unremarkable, its shards scattered like pieces of a puzzle. Poirot's gaze swept the crowd again, lingering on Lorenzo, who had retreated to a corner, his sketchbook open once more. The artist's pencil moved feverishly, but his eyes were fixed on the salon where Beatrice lay. Poirot made a mental note to examine that sketchbook. Art, he knew, could reveal truths the tongue withheld. The music had stopped, and the guests, their festive mood shattered, began to disperse under Antonio's quiet direction. Poirot approached Giovanni, who stood by Beatrice's side, his hands trembling. "Monsieur Fallier," Poirot said softly, "tell me, who served your wife her drink?" Giovanni frowned, his brow furrowed. I don't recall. The butler, perhaps, or the maid. It was chaotic, everyone reaching for glasses." His voice cracked. "Who would do this to her?" "That," Poirot said, "is what I shall discover." He glanced at the Contessa, who watched from a distance, her peacock feather mask now in her hands, revealing eyes heavy with dread. The palazzo, with its gilded beauty, was a stage for deception, and Poirot sensed that the night's drama was but the opening act. As the doctor administered a sedative to Beatrice, Poirot returned to the terrace, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The cyanide suggested intent, but the diluted dose hinted at hesitation, or calculation. Was Beatrice the true target, or was she a pawn in a larger game? And what role did the Fallier family's tensions, Giovanni's recklessness, Lorenzo's resentment, the Contessa's secrets, play in this near tragedy? Poirot's gray cells churned, piecing together the evening's fragments. The masquerade, with its masks and shadows, had concealed more than faces. Somewhere in the palazzo, a poisoner lurked, their motive hidden, but their hand revealed. Hercule Poirot, with his unerring instinct, vowed to unmask them before the death that waited struck again. Chapter 3. The Family Secrets. The morning after the masquerade ball, the Palazzo dei Sospiri lay under a pall of unease, its grandeur dimmed by the previous night's near tragedy. Hercule Poirot sat in the palazzo's library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound tomes and portraits of stern-faced Fallier ancestors. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting latticed shadows on the parquet floor, but the air was heavy with suspicion. Poirot, immaculate in a charcoal suit, his mustache perfectly symmetrical, had requested a private audience with each member of the household. His notebook rested on a mahogany table, its pages blank but poised to capture the secrets he sensed lurking beneath the family's polished veneer. The Contessa Maria Fallier entered first, her black silk gown replaced by a somber gray dress, her silver hair drawn tightly back. She sat opposite Poirot, her hands folded with the dignity of one accustomed to command, yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice steady but low, "Beatrice is recovering thanks to the doctor, but this attack confirms my worst fears. Someone wishes to destroy us." Poirot leaned forward, his green eyes sharp. "Madame, let us speak plainly. You hinted yesterday of tensions within the family. Tell me of these, and of any who might profit from Beatrice's removal." The Contessa hesitated, her fingers tightening. "The Fallier fortune, once vast, has dwindled. Giovanni's marriage to Beatrice brought a dowry that has kept us afloat. Without it, we face ruin. Some in Venice, creditors, rivals, resent this union, but I suspect the threat lies closer to home." "And your nephew, Lorenzo?" Poirot pressed. "His dislike of Madame Beatrice is evident." "Lorenzo is an artist, passionate and proud," she admitted. "He sees Beatrice's wealth as a stain on our name. But he is no murderer, monsieur. He is too disorganized for such a calculated act." Poirot noted her defensiveness, a mother hen shielding her brood. "And Giovanni? His debts perhaps have made enemies?" The Contessa's lips thinned. "Giovanni is reckless, gambling, late nights, but he loves Beatrice. He would not harm her." Poirot made a small note, his pencil whispering against the page. The Contessa's loyalty was admirable, but her omissions were telling. She departed, leaving a faint scent of lavender and secrets. Giovanni Fallier entered next, his youthful charm marred by dark circles under his eyes. He sprawled in the chair, his cravat loosened, as if the weight of the night's events had undone his usual swagger. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice hoarse, "I don't know who did this to Beatrice, but I swear, if I find them—" "Calm yourself, monsieur," Poirot interjected, raising a hand. "Tell me of your enemies. You gamble, oui? In Venice, such habits breed danger." Giovanni flushed. "I owe money, yes, to a man named Marco Vitale, a moneylender in Cannaregio. He's ruthless, but poison? That's not his style. He'd break my legs first." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And within this house, who might wish your wife ill?" Giovanni hesitated, then shrugged. "Lorenzo's always sulking, muttering about Beatrice's money, but he's all talk. The staff, Antonio, Sophia, they're loyal. At least I think so." His uncertainty piqued Poirot's interest. Giovanni's world was one of charm and debt, but his love for Beatrice seemed genuine. Poirot dismissed him, noting the young man's nervous glance toward the door. Beatrice Langley, pale but composed, entered next, supported by a cane. Her auburn hair was pinned simply, and her blue eyes, though weary, held a spark of defiance. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, settling carefully into the chair. "I'm not one to faint at shadows, but last night I felt death brush past me." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, you are most fortunate. The cyanide was weak, a warning perhaps. Have you enemies here?" Beatrice's lips quirked in a wry smile. "I'm an outsider, monsieur, an Englishwoman with money in a city of old blood. Lorenzo loathes me, calls me a parvenu, and I've received letters, anonymous, urging me to leave Venice. They arrived in my chamber, slipped under the door." Poirot's mustache quivered. "These letters, do you have them?" She produced a small bundle from her reticule, tied with twine. The notes, written in a spidery hand, warned of consequences if she remained. Poirot examined them, noting the Italian script and the faint scent of ink, as if freshly penned. "These are most illuminating, madame, and you suspect no one?" Beatrice shook her head. "I've tried to win them over, the Contessa, Lorenzo, but this house feels like a cage." Her candor impressed Poirot, but her vulnerability suggested she was a target, not a player in this game. He thanked her and turned to Lorenzo, who slouched in, his artist's smock stained with charcoal. Lorenzo's dark eyes met Poirot's with a mix of defiance and unease. "I didn't poison her," he said before Poirot could speak. "I don't like Beatrice, but I'm no killer." "Then explain, monsieur, your behavior last night," Poirot said, his tone mild but unyielding. "You watched Madame Beatrice with such intensity, and you left the ballroom before her collapse." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "I was sketching. The light on the canal, it was perfect. I don't care for balls or Beatrice's money. She's changed Giovanni, made him soft." Poirot leaned forward. "And the letters, monsieur? Did you write them to drive her away?" Lorenzo's eyes flickered, but he shook his head. "I've said enough. You'll find nothing on me." His evasion was a red flag, but Poirot let him go, turning to the staff. Antonio, the butler, entered with the deference of long service, his gray hair immaculate. He claimed to have served the Prosecco from a single tray, noticing nothing amiss. But his eyes avoided Poirot's, lingering on a portrait of the Contessa's late husband. "You know this family well, Monsieur Antonio," Poirot said. "What secrets do they keep?" Antonio stiffened. "I am loyal, signore. I see nothing but what is proper." Sophia, the maid, was less composed, her hands twisting in her apron. "I heard arguments, signore," she whispered. "Signor Giovanni and a man, late at night by the canal. Harsh words, about money. I didn't see who." Poirot's gray cells buzzed. The library interviews had revealed a tapestry of motives. The Contessa's fear of ruin, Giovanni's debts, Lorenzo's resentment, Beatrice's vulnerability, and the staff's guarded silence. The anonymous letters and Sophia's overheard argument pointed to a web of deceit, but the cyanide's weak dose suggested a purpose beyond murder, perhaps intimidation, or a warning to fracture the family's fragile unity. As he closed his notebook, Poirot's gaze fell on a small bronze statue of justice, blindfolded and holding scales. "The truth," he murmured. "It is like this statue, blind, but not without balance. Hercule Poirot shall tip the scales." He resolved to explore the canal where Sophia had heard the argument, suspecting it held a clue to the mysterious man, and perhaps to the poisoner's intent. The Palazzo dei Sospiri, with its secrets and shadows, was a labyrinth, but Poirot's methodical mind was already charting its paths. Chapter 4. The Gondola's Shadow. The midday sun hung over Venice, its light fracturing into 1,000 glints on the Grand Canal as Hercule Poirot stepped into a gondola, his black cane gleaming like a beacon of purpose. The events of the masquerade ball, with its near-fatal poisoning of Beatrice Langley, had set his gray cells alight, and he sought the clarity that only the city's waterways could provide. Captain Hastings, summoned from London and newly arrived, sat beside him, his honest face creased with concern. The gondolier, a wiry man with eyes like the lagoon's depths, propelled them forward with steady strokes, the boat gliding past palaces that seemed to float on the water's surface. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, adjusting his straw hat against the glare. "This business with the cyanide, it's dashed peculiar, isn't it? A weak dose, you say? Sounds like someone's playing a dangerous game." "Précisément, mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice low but vibrant with conviction. The poisoner did not wish to kill, not yet. It was a gesture, a message, perhaps to frighten Madame Beatrice, or to sow discord in the Fallier household. But who and why? That is what we must uncover. The gondola slipped beneath the shadow of a stone bridge, its arch festooned with ivy. Poirot's eyes, ever vigilant, scanned the canal's edges, where laundry fluttered and vendors called from their stalls. He was retracing the path Sophia, the maid, had mentioned, an argument overheard between Giovanni and an unknown man by the canal. The location, near the palazzo's private mooring, suggested a clandestine meeting, one that might illuminate the poisoner's motives. As they rounded a bend, the Palazzo dei Sospiri came into view, its marble facade a study in faded glory. Poirot directed the gondolier to pause near a narrow Rio, a side canal where shadows pooled like ink. "Here, Hastings," he said, pointing with his cane. Sophia spoke of voices raised in anger. "Let us see what the canal reveals." Hastings, ever practical, frowned. "Could be Giovanni's gambling debts, Poirot. You said he owes money to this Marco Vitale chap. Perhaps he's the one behind the poisoning, trying to scare Beatrice into paying up." Poirot shook his head, his mustache quivering. "Non, mon ami. The cyanide was in Beatrice's glass alone, a personal act. A creditor like Vitale would strike at Giovanni, not his wife. No, this is a matter of the heart or the family, not mere money." As they drifted, a sudden movement caught Poirot's eye. A figure in a dark cloak stood on a low bridge spanning the Rio, their face obscured by a hood. With a swift motion, the figure dropped a small parcel into the canal, where it sank with a faint splash. Poirot's senses sharpened. "Vite," he urged the gondolier. "Retrieve it." The gondolier, with surprising agility, maneuvered the boat and plunged his oar into the water, hooking the sodden parcel. He handed it to Poirot, who unwrapped it with care, mindful of its contents. Inside was a glass vial, its label faded but unmistakably marked with a skull and crossbones. Cyanide. Tucked beside it was a scrap of paper, its ink smudged but legible. "La mort aspetta." The death that waits. Hastings whistled softly. "Good Lord, Poirot, this is no coincidence. Someone's taunting us." "Or they grow careless," Poirot mused, his eyes gleaming. "This vial, it is like the one used at the ball. But why discard it here, so close to the palazzo? The poisoner is bold, Hastings, or desperate." He examined the paper, noting its coarse texture and the hurried script. The phrase echoed the anonymous letters Beatrice had received, suggesting a single hand behind both. But whose? The cloaked figure had vanished, leaving only ripples on the water. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Giovanni's debts, Lorenzo's resentment, the Contessa's guarded demeanor, and now this cryptic message. "Tell me, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. "What does this phrase suggest to you? The death that waits." Hastings rubbed his chin. "Sounds like a threat, doesn't it? Like someone's biding their time, planning something worse than a warning shot." "Exactement," Poirot agreed. "It is theatrical, this gesture, as if the poisoner wishes us to know they are watching. But they have made a mistake, mon ami. This parcel, it is a clue, and Hercule Poirot does not ignore clues." He instructed the gondolier to return to the palazzo, his mind turning to the household. The vial's discovery near the Rio, where Sophia had overheard the argument, suggested a connection. Was the unknown man Giovanni's creditor, Marco Vitale, or another player in this Venetian drama? And why cyanide, a poison so easily traced yet so dramatically delivered? As they docked, Poirot's gaze lingered on the palazzo's windows, where curtains twitched as if someone watched their return. "Hastings," he said, stepping onto the stone landing. "We must be vigilant. The poisoner is close, perhaps within these walls. Tonight I shall observe Lorenzo closely. His behavior at the ball was most curious, and I suspect he knows more than he admits." Hastings nodded, though his expression was dubious. "Lorenzo's a queer fish, all right, but poison seems a bit sophisticated for an artist." Poirot smiled faintly. "The heart, mon ami, is more complex than any canvas. Come, let us prepare for the evening. The Palazzo dei Sospiri holds its secrets tightly, but they shall not elude Hercule Poirot." As they entered the palazzo, the air seemed to thicken with unspoken tensions. The vial and its ominous message lay heavy in Poirot's pocket, a tangible link to the poisoner's intent. The canal had yielded a clue, but the labyrinth of motives, greed, jealousy, or perhaps a deeper vendetta, remained. Poirot's gray cells hummed, sensing that the death that waited was not yet done with the Fallières family. Chapter 5. The Artist's Confession. The late afternoon light filtered through the high windows of the Palazzo dei Sospiri, casting a golden haze over the library where Hercule Poirot sat, his notebook open and his pencil poised. The discovery of the cyanide vial and the cryptic note, "La mort aspetta," had sharpened his resolve, and he now turned his attention to Lorenzo Fallières, the brooding artist whose resentment of Beatrice Langley simmered like a storm beneath his melancholic exterior. Poirot had requested a private meeting in Lorenzo's attic studio, a place where, he suspected, the young man's guard might slip. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood by the door, his presence a quiet reassurance as Poirot prepared to probe the artist's secrets. The studio was a chaos of creativity, its sloping ceiling draped with cobwebs, its walls lined with canvases depicting Venice in moody hues, canals like veins of shadow, churches shrouded in mist. Lorenzo stood by an easel, his smock stained with paint, his dark eyes wary as Poirot entered. A half-finished sketch of the masquerade ball lay on a table, Beatrice's emerald gown unmistakable in its vivid strokes. Poirot's mustache twitched. The artist's obsession with his cousin's wife was evident. But was it born of hatred or something more complex? "Monsieur Lorenzo," Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet. "You are a man of passion, no? Your art, it speaks of a soul that feels deeply. Yet at the ball, you watched Madame Beatrice with such intensity. Tell me, what is it you feel for her?" Lorenzo's hand tightened on a paintbrush, his knuckles whitening. "I feel nothing for her," he snapped. "She's a blight on this family, with her English money and her heirs. Giovanni was a fool to marry her." Poirot tilted his head, his green eyes unyielding. "And so you wrote the anonymous letters, urging her to leave Venice. Do not deny it, monsieur. The script, it matches the hand in your sketchbook, and the ink, it carries the same faint scent of turpentine." Lorenzo's face paled, his defiance crumbling. "All right," he muttered, tossing the brush onto the table. "I wrote the letters. I wanted her gone, to protect our name. The Fallières are not merchants to be bought with her dowry. But poison? I'd never stoop to that." Poirot stepped closer, his cane tapping softly on the wooden floor. Then explain, monsieur, your absence from the ballroom when Madame Beatrice collapsed. You were on the terrace, sketching, you claim. Yet no one saw you there. Where were you truly? Lorenzo hesitated, his gaze flickering to a small window overlooking the canal. I left the palazzo, he admitted, his voice low. I went to the Rialto Bridge to meet someone, a woman. I can't tell you her name. It's private. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A rendezvous at such an hour? Most curious. And this woman, she can confirm your alibi? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. She won't speak to you. It's complicated. But I swear I wasn't near Beatrice when she was poisoned. Poirot made a mental note of the evasion, his gray cells humming. Lorenzo's confession about the letters was a step toward the truth, but his secret meeting suggested a deeper intrigue. Was the woman a lover, a conspirator, or a distraction? And why the reluctance to name her? Poirot decided to press further. The vial of cyanide, monsieur, found in the canal with the note, La mort aspetta. You know of it? Lorenzo's eyes widened, a flash of fear crossing his face. I know nothing of any vial, he said, his voice rising. You're trying to trap me, but I'm no murderer. Calm yourself, Poirot said, raising a hand. Hercule Poirot does not trap. He observes, he deduces. Your letters were a warning, but the poison. It is another's hand, perhaps. Yet you hide something, and I shall discover it. Hastings, who had been silent, shifted uncomfortably. Poirot, he whispered as Lorenzo turned to his easel. He's a nervous sort, but poison doesn't seem his style. Too messy for an artist, don't you think? Poirot's lips curved slightly. The heart, mon ami, can be messier than any palette. Lorenzo's resentment is real, but his role in this drama, it is not yet clear. Leaving the studio, Poirot descended to the palazzo's courtyard, where the air was thick with the scent of jasmine. The vial and note, now safely stored in his room, pointed to a calculated mind, one that taunted with its boldness. Lorenzo's admission about the letters confirmed his hostility, but his alibi, if true, placed him away from the ballroom at the critical moment. Poirot resolved to follow him that night, suspecting the mysterious woman by the Rialto might hold the key to the poisoner's identity. As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings dined in the palazzo's grand hall, the table set with silver and crystal that gleamed under candlelight. The Contessa, her face pale, spoke little, her eyes darting to Giovanni, who sat beside Beatrice, his hand protective on hers. Beatrice, though still frail, managed a smile. Her resilience, a quiet defiance against the unseen threat. Lorenzo was absent, claiming a headache, but Poirot suspected he was preparing for another nocturnal meeting. After dinner, Poirot donned a dark coat and hat, blending into the shadows as he and Hastings slipped out to trail Lorenzo. The artist left the palazzo by a side door, his figure cloaked in a long scarf, and moved swiftly through Venice's narrow calle. The city was a labyrinth of moonlight and mist, its silence broken only by the echo of footsteps and the distant lap of water. Poirot, with Hastings close behind, followed at a distance, their steps muffled by the damp stones. Lorenzo paused at the Rialto Bridge, its arches ghostly in the fog. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman veiled, her movements quick and furtive. Poirot, hidden behind a market stall, strained to hear their whispered exchange. "You must stop this," the woman said, her voice sharp. "If she finds out, it's over." Lorenzo replied, too low to catch, and the woman pressed a small pouch into his hand before vanishing into the night. Poirot's gray cells buzzed. The woman's words suggested a secret tied to Beatrice, perhaps one Lorenzo feared exposed. The pouch, small but heavy, hinted at payment, or blackmail. Poirot resolved to confront Lorenzo again, but first he needed to know the woman's identity. As they returned to the palazzo, Hastings muttered, "This is getting murkier by the minute, Poirot. Who's this woman, and what's Lorenzo up to?" "The answers, mon ami," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming in the dark, "lie in the shadows of Venice. But fear not, Hercule Poirot shall bring them to light." Back in his room, Poirot examined the pouch which he had deftly retrieved from Lorenzo's coat during a staged stumble at the palazzo's entrance. Inside was a ruby ring, its setting engraved with the initials M.F., the Contessa's initials. Poirot's mind raced. Was Lorenzo stealing from his aunt, or was the ring part of a larger scheme? The artist's confession had opened a door, but the true poisoner remained hidden, their motive as elusive as the Venetian fog. Chapter 6. The Midnight Meeting. The moon hung low over Venice, its pale light fracturing on the canals as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings slipped through the shadowed calle, their footsteps hushed on the ancient stones. The discovery of the ruby ring, engraved with the Contessa's initials, had set Poirot's gray cells ablaze, and he was determined to uncover the truth behind Lorenzo's clandestine meeting at the Rialto Bridge. The night was cool, the air laced with the briny tang of the lagoon, and the city seemed to hold its breath, as if complicit in the secrets of the Palazzo dei Sospiri. Poirot, clad in a dark overcoat to blend with the shadows, led Hastings toward a secluded piazza near the bridge, where he suspected Lorenzo might return. The artist's evasive confession, coupled with the veiled woman's urgent words, "If she finds out, it's over," suggested a conspiracy deeper than mere family resentment. The ruby ring, now tucked securely in Poirot's waistcoat pocket, was a tangible clue, but its meaning, stolen heirloom, payment, or something more sinister, remained elusive. "Hastings," Poirot whispered as they paused behind a weathered statue of a lion. "We must be as silent as the canal itself. Lorenzo's meeting last night was no mere tryst. The woman, she holds a key to this mystery, and I intend to see her face." Hastings nodded, his brow furrowed. "Dashed risky, following him again. What if he spots us? And that ring, do you think Lorenzo's stealing from the Contessa to pay off debts?" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. "Perhaps, mon ami, but the ring is too personal, too significant. It is a thread in the tapestry of this plot, and I shall unravel it." As midnight approached, a figure emerged from a narrow alley. Lorenzo, his scarf pulled high, his movements furtive. He crossed the piazza, pausing by a dry fountain, its basin cracked and empty. Poirot's pulse quickened as another figure appeared, cloaked and veiled as before, her silhouette ghostly against the moonlit stones. The two stood close, their voices low but urgent, carried on the still air to Poirot's keen ears. "You promised the money would be enough," the woman hissed, her accent Venetian but refined. "If Beatrice learns the truth, we're finished." Lorenzo's reply was sharp. "I've done what you asked. The ring will cover it, but no more. I won't betray her further." The woman handed him another small pouch, her gloved hand trembling. "This is the last. Keep silent, or we both pay the price." She turned, vanishing into the shadows of a calle before Poirot could approach. Lorenzo lingered, clutching the pouch, his face a mask of conflict. Poirot, with Hastings at his side, stepped forward, his cane tapping softly. "Monsieur Lorenzo," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "A most interesting rendezvous. Shall we discuss this woman and her secrets?" Lorenzo started, his eyes wide with panic. You followed me? This is none of your business, Monsieur Poirot." "Au contraire," Poirot replied, his tone mild but unyielding. "When cyanide is served at a ball and rings bearing the Contessa's initials change hands in the night, it is very much the business of Hercule Poirot. Who is this woman, and what hold does she have over you?" Lorenzo's shoulders slumped, defeat etched in his posture. "Her name is Isabella Rossi," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's a jeweler, a widow who deals in discreet transactions. She's helping me sell the ring to settle a debt, but it's not what you think." Poirot's mustache quivered. "And this debt, it is not Giovanni's, nor yours, I suspect. The Contessa, does she know you have taken her ring?" Lorenzo shook his head, his eyes averted. "She doesn't. I took it from her jewel box weeks ago. It was to protect her, to keep the family from ruin. Isabella promised to sell it quietly, but she's demanding more than I expected." Poirot's mind raced. The Contessa's ring, Lorenzo's secrecy, and Isabella's cryptic warning about Beatrice suggested a financial scheme, but one tangled with personal stakes. Was Lorenzo acting alone, or was he a pawn in a larger game? The mention of Beatrice, if she finds out, pointed to a secret tied to the English heiress, perhaps her dowry or her influence over the Fallier fortune. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said, gesturing for Lorenzo to return to the palazzo. "We shall keep this matter private, Monsieur Lorenzo, for now. But know this, the truth, it cannot be hidden. From Hercule Poirot." Back at the palazzo, Poirot retreated to his room, the ruby ring glinting under the lamplight as he examined it once more. Its craftsmanship was exquisite, the initials M.F. etched with precision. He recalled the Contessa's strained demeanor, her fear for the family's future. Had she authorized Lorenzo's actions, or was he acting out of misguided loyalty? And Isabella Rossi, what role did this jeweler play in the poisoner's plot? Hastings, pacing the room, broke the silence. "Poirot, this is getting murkier by the hour. Lorenzo's selling family jewels, meeting shady jewelers in the dead of night. Could he be the poisoner, trying to scare Beatrice away to keep the dowry?" Poirot shook his head. "Non, mon ami. Lorenzo's letters were a crude attempt to intimidate, but the cyanide, it is too precise, too theatrical. The poisoner wishes to control, not merely to frighten. The ring, however, suggests a financial motive, one that may involve the Contessa herself." He rose, his movements brisk. "Tomorrow, we shall seek this Isabella Rossi. Her shop, it will be near the Rialto, where such transactions thrive. She may reveal what Lorenzo conceals." As he prepared for bed, Poirot's thoughts turned to the piazza's whispered exchange. Isabella's fear of Beatrice finding out suggested a secret tied to the family's finances, perhaps a scheme to siphon Beatrice's dowry or to cover Giovanni's debts without her knowledge. The cyanide, the letters, the ring, all were threads in a web of deception, and Poirot sensed the poisoner was close, their motives hidden in the shadows of the palazzo. The night was silent, save for the distant toll of a church bell. Poirot closed his eyes, his gray cells weaving through the clues, the diluted poison, the anonymous letters, the canal's vial, and now the ruby ring. The death that waited in Venice was patient, but Poirot was more so. He would follow the trail to Isabella Rossi, and from her he would extract the truth that Lorenzo guarded so fiercely. Chapter 7. The Truth Unveiled. The grand salon of the Palazzo dei Sospiri shimmered in the evening light, its chandeliers casting a soft glow over the assembled household. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small frame commanding the room with an authority born of certainty. His polished shoes gleamed, his mustache was a perfect crescent, and his green eyes sparkled with the clarity of revelation. Around him sat the Falier family and their retainers, the Contessa Maria, her face pale but regal. Giovanni, his hand clasped tightly around Beatrice's. Beatrice herself, recovered but wary. Lorenzo, slouched in a chair, his artist's hands restless. Antonio, the butler, standing rigidly by the door, and Sophia, the maid, her eyes downcast. Captain Hastings, ever faithful, hovered near a window, watching the canal's dark waters reflect the fading day. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and measured. The events of these past days, the poison in Madame Beatrice's glass, the vial in the canal, the anonymous letters, the ruby ring, have woven a tapestry of deceit, but Hercule Poirot has unraveled it. The truth, it is now clear, and the death that waited in Venice shall wait no longer. The room stirred, eyes darting between faces, but Poirot raised a hand for silence. Let us begin with the poison. The cyanide in Madame Beatrice's Prosecco was diluted, a dose meant not to kill but to terrify. Why? To drive her from Venice, to fracture the marriage that saved the Falier fortune. But who would benefit from such a schism? He turned to Giovanni, whose jaw tightened. Monsieur Giovanni, your debts to Marco Vitale, the moneylender, are substantial, yet you love your wife, and her dowry has kept the palazzo afloat. You had no motive to harm her, but your recklessness, it has made enemies. Giovanni flushed, but Beatrice squeezed his hand, her gaze steady. Poirot continued, his eyes shifting to Lorenzo. Monsieur Lorenzo, you admitted to writing the anonymous letters, urging Madame Beatrice to leave. Your resentment of her wealth was clear. But your alibi at the Rialto Bridge, confirmed by the jeweler Isabella Rossi, places you away from the ballroom during the poisoning. You are guilty of malice, but not of murder. Lorenzo's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained guarded. Poirot's gaze moved to the Contessa, whose fingers clutched her lace handkerchief. Madame la Contessa, he said softly, you spoke of a shadow over your family, a fear of ruin. Yet you concealed a truth. The ruby ring, engraved with your initials, was not stolen by Lorenzo. You gave it to him, did you not? The Contessa's lips parted, a faint gasp escaping. Monsieur Poirot, Permit me to explain, Poirot interjected, his tone gentle but firm. The Falier fortune was crumbling, eroded by Giovanni's debts and the palazzo's upkeep. Beatrice's dowry was a lifeline, but you feared her influence, her modern ways, would change the family forever. You devised a plan, subtle yet desperate, to frighten her away, preserving the dowry while restoring the old order. He paced slowly, his cane tapping the marble floor. You enlisted Antonio, your loyal butler, to lace Beatrice's glass with a weak dose of cyanide during the ball. The chaos of the masquerade provided cover, and Antonio, devoted to you since your husband's death, obeyed without question. The vial in the canal, with its note, La mort aspetta, was your flourish, a warning to Beatrice that Venice was no place for her. Antonio's face remained impassive, but a bead of sweat betrayed him. The Contessa's eyes filled with tears. Monsieur Poirot, I meant no harm, she whispered. I thought, if Beatrice left, we could keep her money and save our name. I never intended death. Poirot nodded, his expression softening. I believe you, madame. Your plan was born of desperation, not cruelty. The diluted poison, the letters, these were acts of fear, not malice. But you underestimated Madame Beatrice's strength, and you did not foresee the chaos your actions would unleash. He turned to the others. Lorenzo, your letters were your own scheme, misguided but separate. You sought to protect your aunt, unaware of her plan. The ring, given to Isabella Rossi to sell, was to cover Giovanni's debts discreetly, a secret you kept to spare the Contessa shame. Beatrice spoke, her voice steady despite her pallor. Why didn't you tell me, Contessa? I would have helped without all this. The Contessa's composure broke, tears streaming down her cheeks. I was proud, foolish. I thought I could control it all. Poirot's gaze swept the room. The death that waited was not a murder, but a warning that nearly tore this family apart. Madame Beatrice, your courage has preserved you. Monsieur Giovanni, your love must now guide you to reform. And Madame la Contessa, you must make amends. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Hercule Poirot does not seek vengeance, but justice. I shall keep your secret, madame, if you vow to restore trust within this house. The police need not know, for no true crime was committed, only a grave mistake. The Contessa nodded, her voice choked. I swear it, monsieur. Hastings, who had listened in silence, leaned toward Poirot. Good heavens, Poirot, you've done it again. But how did you know it was the Contessa? Poirot smiled faintly. The ring, mon ami. Its initials, her hesitation, Antonio's loyalty. These were the threads. The poison's weakness was the final clue, for only one who loved the family would hesitate to kill. As the household dispersed, Giovanni and Beatrice clasped hands, their bond strengthened by the ordeal. Lorenzo, chastened, offered a quiet apology, while Antonio bowed his head, his duty now tempered by remorse. The Contessa, her pride humbled, retired to her chambers, vowing to rebuild what her fear had nearly destroyed. Poirot closed his notebook, his gray cells at rest. The Palazzo dei Sospiri, with its secrets laid bare, seemed lighter, as if the shadows had lifted. The death that waited had been thwarted, not by force, but by the relentless clarity of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 8. The Departure. The morning sun rose over Venice, painting the canals with strokes of rose and gold, as if the city itself sought to wash away the shadows of the past days. Hercule Poirot stood at the private landing of the Palazzo dei Sospiri, his valise packed, his Homburg hat tilted just so. The air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of salt and the promise of renewal. Captain Hastings, ever the steadfast companion, stood beside him, his face a mix of relief and lingering astonishment at the denouement of the Fallier family's drama. Their train to Paris awaited, and the gondola that would carry them to the station bobbed gently at the mooring. Poirot, Hastings said, adjusting his tie as the gondolier prepared the boat. You've outdone yourself this time, unmasking the Contessa's scheme without a drop of blood spilled. It's a marvel, but I confess, I thought Lorenzo was our man until the end. Poirot's mustache curved in a faint smile. Mon ami, the heart of man is a labyrinth, and Lorenzo's resentment was but a thread, not the knot. The Contessa's fear, her pride, these were the true architects of this plot. Yet, in her remorse, there is hope for redemption. The palazzo's heavy doors opened, and Beatrice Langley emerged, her auburn hair catching the light, her step light despite the ordeal. Giovanni followed, his arm linked with hers, his face no longer shadowed by recklessness, but softened by resolve. The Contessa, dressed in muted violet, stood behind them, her patrician features composed but marked by a new humility. Lorenzo lingered at the threshold, his sketchbook tucked under his arm, his gaze averted but no longer hostile. "Monsieur Poirot," Beatrice said, her voice warm, "we owe you more than words can express. You've given us a chance to mend what was broken." Poirot bowed, his hand over his heart. "Madame, it is the order of things that Hercule Poirot restores. Your courage, it has been the true salvation of this house." Giovanni stepped forward, his handshake firm. "I've sworn off the gambling dens, monsieur. Beatrice and I will rebuild together. No more secrets." The Contessa approached, her eyes glistening. "Monsieur Poirot, your discretion, it is a gift. I shall honor my vow to you to make amends. The Fallier name will endure, not in pride, but in truth." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, the heart that acknowledges its fault is already on the path to virtue. I trust you will guide your family well." Lorenzo, prompted by a glance from Beatrice, muttered, "I was wrong about you, Signora. I'll try to do better." His words, though halting, carried sincerity, and Beatrice's smile was a quiet absolution. As Poirot and Hastings boarded the gondola, the family stood together, a tableau of tentative unity against the palazzo's weathered facade. The gondolier pushed off, and the boat glided into the canal, the water mirroring the sky's fleeting colors. Poirot gazed at the receding palazzo, his mind replaying the case, the cyanide's bitter scent, the ruby ring's gleam, the whispered fears in the piazza. Each clue had led to the Contessa's desperate act, a warning meant to fracture, but instead forging a new bond. "Hastings," Poirot mused, his voice soft as the lapping water. "Venice, she is like the human soul, beautiful but full of shadows. The death that waited was not a killer, but a mirror reflecting the fears we hide." Hastings nodded, his practical mind content to leave the city's mysteries behind. "All's well that ends well, eh, Poirot? Though I'll be glad to get back to solid ground. These canals give me the jitters." Poirot chuckled, his eyes bright. "For you, mon ami, the solid ground. For Hercule Poirot, the next puzzle awaits, wherever it may lie." The gondola merged with the Grand Canal's flow, carrying them toward the station and the Orient Express beyond. As Venice's spires faded into the mist, Poirot's gray cells, ever restless, turned to the future, ready for the next enigma to challenge their precision. The Palazzo dei Sospiri, with its secrets laid bare, stood as a testament to his method, a method that saw through masks, shadows, and the heart's darkest corners.